Before Jumoke could explain, Chichi grabbed the kettle and poured the hot water on her arm. Jumoke screamed, clutching her burnt arm. I am sorry, Jumoke said. Sorry isn't good enough. Maybe next time you will learn to obey me. Mrs. Gladys sat quietly on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. The air in the room felt thick with unspoken emotions. As Jumoke sat beside her, her face streaked with tears, her heart breaking in silence. Jumoke, my dear, you don't have to be afraid anymore. Everything will be okay. Michael will take care of you and the baby. You are not alone in this, Mrs. Gladys said. Jumoke looked up, her face swollen from crying. Her voice trembled as she spoke. But Mama, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't want to come between you and your son and his wife. I never wanted to hurt anyone. And now, everything is so complicated, Jumoke said. Mrs. Gladys sighed softly, reaching out to hold Jumoke's hands. My dear, this isn't your fault. You didn't ask for this. Joseph put you and Michael in this position. You have been honest with Michael, and that is all that matters. Don't let Chichi's lies and the word tear you apart, Mrs. Gladys said. Tears spilled over again as Jumoke buried her face in her hands. I feel guilty, Ma. I know Michael is angry and hurt, but I didn't want this to happen like this. Chichi hates me. I don't want Michael to suffer because of me, Jumoke said. Mrs. Gladys gently rubbed Jumoke's back, her voice soft but firm. Jumoke, listen to me. Chichi made her choices, and now she has to face the consequences. Michael isn't suffering because of you. He's hurting because of the lies and deceit that Chichi brought into his life. You have to be strong for yourself and for that child inside you. Don't let Chichi's bitterness ruin your happiness, Mrs. Gladys said. Jumoke sobbed quietly, trembling from the weight of everything she had been holding in. Mrs. Gladys pulled her into a warm hug, offering the comfort she desperately needed. I just want peace, Ma. I just want to be happy with my child. I am so scared of what is going to happen next, Jumoke said, crying. Mrs. Gladys tightened her arms around Jumoke, whispering gently, everything will be fine, Jumoke. Michael will take good care of you, I promise you that, Mrs. Gladys said. The room fell into a quiet stillness as Jumoke's sob gradually subsided. Mrs. Gladys held her closely, rocking her gently like a mother comforting her child. In that moment, nothing else mattered except the quiet reassurance that they would get through this together. Back at Chichi's house, the tension only continues to grow. Chichi, if you keep going down this path, you will lose everything. Michael has already made up his mind. He's going to choose Jumoke. Can't you see? This is your last chance to make things right, Mrs. Susan said. Make things right. There is no fixing this, Mama. It is over. Michael has already replaced me. And you know what? I don't care anymore. I will just make sure they pay, Chichi said. How can you not care, Chichi? You are going to lose everything. Your marriage, your home, your dignity, Mrs. Susan responded. Dignity? What dignity, Mama? You think I still have that? Michael humiliated me. He flaunted his affair with Jumoke. And now, he's making Joseph the reason for Jumoke's pregnancy. And he wants me to just walk away quietly. I won't give them that satisfaction, Chichi responded. Mrs. Susan's voice shook with frustration. You are throwing your life away, Chichi. For what? Pride? Revenge? For myself, Mama. For once in my life, I am choosing me. And if that means losing everything, so be it. And don't forget, Mama, you taught me that revenge is the only way, Chichi said. Tears welled up in Mrs. Susan's eyes as she whispered softly, almost pleading. Chichi, don't do this. Please, don't walk away from your future. My daughter. You still have the chance to make things right, Mrs. Susan said. But Chichi's heart had hardened. It is too late, Mama. There is no going back now, Chichi said. Mrs. Susan stood there, helpless as the weight of her daughter's words sank in. She knew that this moment marked the end of something precious, and it broke her heart more than she could ever express. Meanwhile, Michael stood in the doorway of his mother's house, his eyes red and filled with sadness. His clothes reeked of alcohol, and he could barely stand. Mrs. Gladys, who had stayed up waiting for him, immediately noticed the pain in her son's eyes. Michael, what happened? I'm so sorry about everything. Chichi can be so cruel. Her voice was soft, full of concern as she approached him. Michael didn't answer. He collapsed into a chair and buried his face in his hands, his body shaking as he cried silently. Why, Mama? Why did she do this to me? Mrs. Gladys sat beside him, rubbing his back to comfort him. Her heart ached seeing her son in so much pain. Michael, I know it is hard, but you have to be strong. God is revealing Chichi's lies for a reason. This is his way of protecting you, Mrs. Gladys said. Michael lifted his head, his eyes full of tears, his voice barely a whisper. But why? Why would she keep something like that from me? I loved her, trusted her. How could she hide that she doesn't have a womb? How could she betray me like this? Michael said. He broke down again, the weight of the pain too much to bear. Mrs. Gladys wrapped her arms around him, holding him as he cried. Oh my dear, I know this is hard to accept, but you must remember that not everything is in our control. Chichi made her choices long before you found out, but God is giving you a way out. He's showing you her true colors, Mrs. Gladys said. Michael shook his head, his voice full of pain. But I trusted her, Mama. I trusted her completely, and she lied to me. She made me feel like I was the one at fault, like I couldn't give her children. How could she hurt me like this? Mrs. Gladys sighed, her heart heavy for her son. Michael, I know it's hot, but Chichi was never meant for you. You are too good for her. She didn't deserve your love. Now, you need to focus on your future, on the child Jumoke is carrying. That baby is now your new beginning. Don't let Chichi's lies destroy you, Mrs. Susan said. Michael wiped his tears, but the sadness remained in his eyes. Jumoke, she doesn't deserve this either. She's been through so much because of me, because of Joseph's mistakes. I just wanted things to be right, Michael said. Mrs. Gladys nodded, her voice warm and reassuring. And they will be right, Michael, but you have to be strong. Jumoke needs you. That baby needs you. You have faced challenges before, and you will face more in the future, but God will guide you through them. Don't give up. Be there for Jumoke, just as she's been there for you, Mrs. Gladys said. Michael's tears continued to flow, but his mother's word comforted him, bringing him some peace. I don't understand, Mama. I still can't believe Chichi betrayed me like this. I would have done anything for her, Michael said. Mrs. Gladys gently placed her hand on his shoulder and looked into his eyes. Because she was never meant for you, Michael. You have always been too perfect for her. Now, it is time to let go. Chichi will face the consequences of her action, but you need to focus on what matters, the unborn child and your future with Jumoke. Don't let Chichi's bitterness consume you. Michael nodded slowly, his heart still heavy but his resolve starting to strengthen. Back at Chichi's house, Chichi sat alone in the dim living room, consumed by her thoughts of revenge. Her mother's word echoed in her mind, but they didn't calm the anger inside her. She scrolled through her phone, but her mind was focused on one thing: Michael and Jumoke. They think they can humiliate me like that, replace me like I am nothing. Michael, Jumoke, they will regret this. I'll make sure they pay for everything. I won't stop until their lives are ruined, Chichi said, thinking to herself. Her thoughts turned darker as she plotted her next move, her face twisted in bitterness. I gave up everything for Michael, and now he thinks he can just move on with her. No, they won't get away with this. I will make sure they both suffer, Chichi thought to herself as she scrolled through her phone, her fingers trembling with anger, unable to calm the rage inside her. Meanwhile, back in Ondo State, Iremide and Moju sat on the couch, casually going through Facebook on Moju's phone. Suddenly, a video caught their attention. It was Jumoke, her eyes filled with tears, standing face to face with Amaka at school. Let's keep this abeg, Moju said. She moved her finger to scroll past, but something made her stop. A comment under the video caught her eyes. Poor Jumoke, she's been through so much. People can be so cruel. She deserved better. Just imagine, she trusted her friend so much. The comments read. Moju froze. Her eyes widened as she read the comments. Iremide looked over confused. Wait, what is this? Is that not Jumoke? Moju nodded, her hands trembling as she scrolled through the comments. I can't believe this. We didn't trust her. We didn't believe our own sister, Moju said. Tears filled their eyes as they looked at each other. The weight of their guilt is sinking in. We were so wrong. We thought she was lying all this time, but she was suffering. We didn't even see it, Iremide said. Moju's voice cracked as she spoke. What have we done? Could we let her go through this alone? Moju said. They both cried. They realized their mistake and it hit them hard. They had failed their sister when she needed them the most. Back at Jumoke's place, Jumoke lay in bed. Her sleep was restless. Suddenly, she woke up with a start, her heart pounding in her chest. She sat up, grasping for breath, her hands shaking. No. Her mind replayed the nightmare she had just woken up from. Chichi was chasing her, trying to attack her. Jumoke's chest tightened with fear as she tried to calm down. It is just a dream. Just a dream, Jumoke said to herself. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. As she tried to continue to go back to sleep, her mother's spirit appeared to her, crying and smiling at the same time. The sun had just risen when Michael stood outside Jumoke's room. Hesitating for a moment, he took a deep breath, knocked gently, and entered. Jumoke was already awake, sitting on the bed with a distant look in her eyes. Good morning, Jumoke, he spoke softly, not wanting to disturb her. Jumoke looked up. Her expression softened when she saw him. Good morning, Sir Michael, Jumoke said. There was a brief silence as Michael gathered his thoughts, choosing his word carefully. How was your night? Did you sleep well? Michael said. It was fine, sir. She paused, giving a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Thank you. Michael nodded, exhaling softly, feeling the weight of his emotions. Jumoke, I am so sorry for everything you have gone through. I'm sorry for what my family put you through. His voice trembled. You didn't deserve any of this. I failed to protect you from so much. Jumoke shook her head, her eyes understanding. No, Sir Michael, you have always been kind to me, even when things were difficult with Chichi. You didn't have to take my side, but you did. She looked down, her voice filled with sorrow. And I'm sorry if I caused any trouble between you and your wife. Michael placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Please, Jumoke, don't feel that way. You didn't ruin my marriage with Chichi. That marriage, it was built on lies from the start. He lowered his voice. Jumoke, Chichi doesn't have a womb. She has been hiding it from me. Jumoke's eyes widened in shock, her hands covering her mouth. Sir Michael, I am sorry. I didn't know. Michael nodded, sadness in his eyes. I just found out myself. She lied to me for so long, made me believe I was the one who couldn't give her children. Michael said as he shook his head, swallowing his pain. But that's all in the past now. What matters is you and And the baby, I'm here for you, Jumoke. I will do everything I can do to protect you and our child. I will help you reconnect with your family if I can. Jumoke's hand clenched together tightly, her gaze lowering. Please, Sir Michael, don't worry about that. My family, they don't want me. They made that clear long ago. Her voice was soft, filled with old wounds. Michael shook his head, determined. No, Jumoke, you deserve peace and acceptance, especially from your family. They may not see it now, but one day they will understand what they've lost. Jumoke managed a small smile, her eyes glistering. Thank you, Sir Michael, for everything. I just hope this child has a better life than I did. Michael nodded, his heart heavy with the promise he silently made to her and the unborn child. Later that day, Michael met with his younger brother Joseph. The atmosphere was tense and Joseph avoided Michael's gaze, shame written on his face. Joseph, I don't even know what to say to you. You disappointed me. How could you treat Jumoke like this? You shouldn't have done that to her in school. Joseph looked down, tears welling up in his eyes. I am sorry. I am sorry, Michael. I didn't mean to hurt her. I thought I was helping. His voice cracked, guilty weighing on him. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have believed what Chichi and her friends were saying. Michael's expression softened and he reached out to pull Joseph into a tight hug. It is okay, Joseph. I am not angry anymore. I just needed you to understand you should never treat another girl like that again. Don't let anyone's lies cloud your judgment. He held his brother by the shoulder, looking him in his eyes. Chichi's lies drag us all into darkness, but now we need to make better choices. Joseph nodded, wiping his tears from his cheek. I promise, Michael, I will make things right, somehow. Meanwhile, across the street from Jumoke's family house in Ondo, a sleek car was parked outside. Inside, Chichi sat waiting, her eyes narrowing. As David approached, she waved him over with a slight smile as he climbed into the passenger seat. She had contacted David after finding information about Jumoke's family on social media, and after chatting with him, David had sent her their address. David, I am glad you came. I see you don't like your sister that much. From what you were saying on chat yesterday, David nodded, though he seemed unsure. We don't. She caused a lot of trouble, but I don't know if I can go as far as you are asking. Chichi smirked, her voice coaxing. David, I am not asking for anything drastic. Just remind Jumoke who she really is. Make sure she knows her place. She leaned closer, her voice cold. And I will pay you well for your help. You won't regret it. Trust me, David. David shifted uncomfortably, looking at the ground. Look, I don't want her dead or anything. She's still my sister, and that doesn't change. Chichi rolled her eyes, her tone mocking. You are soft, David. You know she's pregnant, right? With my husband's child. She's stealing everything from me, David. This is your chance to set things right. Show her what betrayal really feel like. You can't allow your sister steal someone else's husband. Chichi said, she's still my sister no matter what. I love her and she loves me. David replied. Chichi sneered. I don't think so. She once told me and my husband that she hates you all and doesn't care about your mother. Chichi said. Immediately, David's jaw tightened, anger flashing in his eyes as the thought of his mother's pain. She betrayed us, lied to us all these years. I will do it, but only because she caused so much harm. I hope the substance isn't dangerous, David said. Chichi's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as she pulled a small vial from her bag. Here, when you see her, slip it into her drink. It is not dangerous. It will just make her more compliant. Once she's out of the way, everything will be fine. Chichi said, laughing softly, I will send you your money for transport to Lagos, and if you do well, there will be more money for you. David took the vial, unsure but resolute. All right, I will do it, David said. Chichi's laughter filled the car as she started the engine, leaving David standing there with the vial in his hand, planning his next move, thinking about how he would convince Jumoke he wanted to apologize. The night was quiet. It grew darker, each person consumed by their own secrets, and David sat alone in a dimly lit room, struggling with his emotions after his conversation with Chichi. Her hurtful words still echoed in his mind. He picked up his phone and tried calling Jumoke again. Come on, Jumoke, pick up the call, he muttered, but the call went to voicemail. Frustrated, he tried again, but it was still the same. The weight of Chichi's manipulation pressed down on him, making everything feel unbearable. The next morning, Michael paced nervously in his living room. He could no longer pretend his marriage to Chichi was fine. It was time to end the facade. With a deep breath, he called his lawyer. Hello, Mr. Osunla. It is me, Michael. I need you to prepare a divorce paper for me. Michael, what is going on? Why the sudden divorce? The lawyer asked. I can't do this anymore. Chichi has been hiding things from me, and I finally realized our marriage was built on lies. I can't live like this, Michael said, sitting down, his voice steady but filled with sadness. I understand. I will start working on the papers. You can come by tomorrow to pick them. Thank you, Michael said, feeling a slight relief. Later that day, in Michael's family kitchen, the smell of spicy stew filled the air as Mrs. Gladys stirred the pots and Jumoke chopped vegetables. Their conversation was casual, but there was something important Mrs. Gladys wanted to ask. Jumoke, can I ask you something? Mrs. Gladys said. Jumoke looked up, curious. Of course, ma. What is on your mind? Mrs. Gladys paused, then asked, how would you feel if Michael wanted to make you his wife? Jumoke froze, her hands stilling as the question sank in. I didn't expect you to ask that. She shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Gladys smiled softly, understanding her surprise. It is just a question. I want to know how you truly feel about my son. Jumoke took a deep breath, then said, I don't think that would happen. Michael is married, and I don't want to cause any more pain. Besides, I am not ready for marriage. I want to finish my studies first. I'm only 19. Mrs. Gladys nodded, her expression understanding. That is fair, but Michael is planning to divorce Chichi soon. He deserves a chance to be happy, and so do you. She paused, looking thoughtful. I won't pressure you, but I think you should consider it. Jumoke felt grateful for Mrs. Gladys' understanding. Thank you for being so kind. It really means a lot. Mrs. Gladys smiled warmly. Just think about it, okay? You deserve to be happy. Jumoke nodded, her heart feeling lighter. I will, ma. As she continued chopping the vegetables, her thoughts drifted. Michael had always been kind to her, even when Chichi maltreated her. He had listened and cared for her, and stood by her when no one else did. She couldn't help but wonder if he could be the one to take care of her. The thought made her heart race. Meanwhile, as the sun began to set, Michael arrived in Ondo State. His heart raced as he searched for Jumoke's family house. Holding the address in his hand, after what felt like forever, he finally arrived, took a deep breath, and knocked gently on the gate. When it opened, he found himself face to face with Mr. Afolabi, Jumoke's father. Young man, who are you looking for? Mr. Afolabi asked, confused. Michael cleared his throat, trying to stay calm. I'm here to talk about Jumoke. It is important. Mr. Afolabi's face softened, and he gestured for Michael to enter. Inside, Jumoke's family, Mr. Afolabi, Moju, David, and Iremide sat in the living room. The air was thick with tension. Thank you for letting me in, Michael said, his voice filled with emotions. I know this is a surprise, but I need to tell you something. I'm responsible for Jumoke's pregnancy. It is a long story, but my brother put us both in this position. Jumoke is innocent. She was set up. Moju's eyes widened in shock and tears began to fill her eyes. Oh my God, Moju whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't believe when she said she was innocent. I'm so sorry. She broke down in tears, sobbing uncontrollable. David's eyes narrowed, recognizing Michael. Isn't this Chichi's husband? He thought, feeling a mix of emotions. Mr. Falabi's voice was filled with regrets. After watching the video of Jumoke, I can't stop thinking about how bad I treated her. I neglected her, chased her away. I didn't trust her when I should have. Michael nodded. Jumoke misses you all. She's staying at my parents' house right now, but I promise to bring you to see her tomorrow. David's heart skipped a bit. This could work in his favor. Iremide, who had been silent the entire time, suddenly collapsed to her knee, crying, "Please, don't cry, Iremide," Moju said, trying to comfort her. But Iremide shook her head, her tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm the one who killed our mother." The room fell into stunned silence. Everyone stared at Iremide, unable to process her word. "What do you mean?" Mr. Falabi asked, his voice trembling. "Iremide, no!" Moju cried out. "That's not true." But Iremide shook her head, her sob growing louder. "I didn't mean to. I killed our mother." As Iremide's confession sank in, David spoke up, his voice filled with regret. "So Jumoke was innocent all along. I can't believe this." Mr. Falabi's face turned pale, his lip trembling. He struggled to speak, but could only whisper, "Iremide, why? Iremide, how could you? Why would you do this?" Iremide's face was wet with tears. As she looked at her father, she took a deep breath, her voice thick with guilt. I didn't mean to. I was just so angry. Mom always loved Jumoke more than any of us. I felt like I didn't matter. I thought if she wasn't around, maybe you would notice me. Michael looked confused, struggling to understand what Iremide was saying. He saw Mr. Falabi was just shocked. Iremide continued, her voice trembling. "It happened in the hospital. When Jumoke went outside, I put something in the water mother was drinking. I made sure she drank it all. That stuff made her blood pressure rise even more." Mojo gasped, her hands covering her mouth in disbelief. "Iremide, how could you? You were supposed to protect us. Why take away our happiness? Our mother, for crying out loud." Her word hit hard, and Iremide looked away ashamed. David cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "Mr. Michael, there is something I want to tell you. Yesterday, your wife, Mrs. Chichi, came here. She gave me something to put in Jumoke's drink. She said it would teach her a lesson." Immediately, Michael's face turned dark with anger. "What? My wife was here? What do you mean by teach her a lesson?" Michael asked. David lowered his head, swallowing hard. "She messaged me on Facebook, offering money to help her. I didn't understand why at first, but now I see it was all part of her plan to hurt Jumoke. I'm sorry, Michael. I just had to tell you the truth now that I know Jumoke is innocent." The shock deepened and Moju shook her head, stunned. "I don't get this family anymore. How could she do something like this?" And Iremide, David's tears fell as he choked out his apology. "I'm sorry for accepting anything from her. I didn't know what she was planning. Now I know my sister is innocent." Michael's rage fled as he paced. Chichi crossed the line. "She's going to pay for this. I'll make sure she's arrested." A tense silence fell. Finally, Moju spoke up, her heart heavy with confusion. "I don't recognize this family anymore. So many secrets, so many pain." Moju said. Mr. Folabi stood frozen, overwhelmed by everything he had just heard. After a long pause, he looked at Iremide, his face hardening with resolve. Iremide, you will have to face the consequences for this. I can't just let it go. Still on her knees, Iremide looked up at her father, tears streaming down her face. She stumbled to her feet and ran to her room, her cries echoing through the room. Moju's face showing anger and betrayal, unable to see her sister the same way. Mr. Folabi reached for his phone to call the police, but Michael raised a hand, his expression softened. Sir, she confessed. She needs to face the consequences, but not through arrest. Let her carry this burden alone. Mr. Folabi paused, conflicted but then nodded, the weight of the decision heavy on him. Michael, thank you for everything. You are a stranger, yet you helped prove Jumoke's innocency. It takes someone truly selfless to step forward like you did. I don't know how I can repay you, Mr. Folabi said. Mr. Folabi, you don't need to thank me. The moment I saw Jumoke, I knew she was innocent and I needed to apologize. My family, they were part of the ones who wronged her, and I'm sorry for everything. I hope this can somehow make up for what she had been through, Mr. Michael said. Mr. Folabi placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, his eyes full of gratitude. He could feel the past easing slightly and took a deep breath, grateful for Michael's honesty. Meanwhile, in the quiet of her room, Jumoke lay on her bed, her heart heavy. Just as she was about to close her eyes, a bright light suddenly filled the room. The air seemed to be hum with energy, and a figure appeared in front of her. Mother, is that really you? Jumoke asked. Jumoke reached out, her voice shaking. Tears streamed down her face as she saw her mother's figure, glowing and serene. I thought I would never see you again. I miss you so much. Her mother's figure was faint, like a dream, but the love in her eyes was undeniable. A gentle smile crossed her lip. I love you, my daughter. I'm so proud of you, her mother said. Her voice was soft like a whisper from the afterlife, and the words filled Jumoke with peace. Slowly, her mother's figure began to fade, slipping back into the shadows. No, don't go, mother. Please don't go, Jumoke said. Her cries faded into the silent night. As the room returned to darkness, Jumoke felt an overwhelming emptiness, her heart aching where her mother had been. Suddenly, the door busted open, and Mr. Gladys rushed in, concern written all over her face. Jumoke, what is going on? I heard you screaming. Are you okay? Jumoke looked up to her, her face wet from tears, trembling. I saw her. I saw her, Mrs. Gladys. I saw my mother. She was here. She told me she loves me and she's proud of me. Her voice cracked as she spoke, barely above a whisper. Mrs. Gladys wrapped her arms around Jumoke, holding her tight. Oh my dear, it is okay. I'm here. I'm here with you. Jumoke clung to her, sobbing against Mrs. Gladys' shoulder. Your mother loved you so much. She's watching over you, proud of the person you have become. She never left you, my dear. She will always be with you in your heart, Mrs. Gladys said. Jumoke nodded, her sobs slowing as she found comfort in Mrs. Gladys' embrace. As the night grew darker, Jumoke felt a sense of peace for the first time in a long while. With the love of those who cared for her and the quiet strength of her mother's spirit, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The next morning, Michael and Jumoke's family packed up their things and got ready to leave Ondo. Despite being 5, they managed to squeeze into Michael's car, filled with excitement and hope. As they drove off, the first light of the dawn filtered through the trees, symbolizing new beginnings. At Michael's parents' house, Mrs. Gladys was on the phone with her son Michael. She stood by the kitchen counter, listening intently as his voice cracked on the other end. Mom, I'm on my way back now. I'm bringing Jumoke's family with me, Michael said. Mrs. Gladys raised her eyebrow in surprise, smiling with warmth. She knew how much this meant to Jumoke, and the idea of Michael bringing her family over reassured her. That is great, Michael. Don't worry, I won't say anything to Jumoke. She will be so surprised to see them. Mrs. Gladys said, yes, please keep it a secret. I want her to feel the happiness of reuniting with them without knowing I'm bringing them along, Michael said. Mrs. Gladys chuckled softly, her smile clear in her voice. Alright then, I'll start preparing some food for everyone, especially since we are having a guest, maybe even future family. Michael chuckled, feeling touched by his mother's hope. Thank you, Mama. I will call you later. After the call, Mrs. Gladys sighed and whispered to herself, I pray Michael and Jumoke end up together, especially now that he's leaving Chichi behind. She smiled, hopeful, and went to the kitchen to start cooking. While cooking a variety of dishes, the delicious scent of spice filled the air. At that moment, Jumoke walked into the kitchen, surprised to see the spread of ingredients laid out on the counter. Good morning, Mrs. Gladys. Wow, are you expecting guests? Jumoke asked. Mrs. Gladys smiled warmly and quickly came up with a reply. Oh yes, my friends are coming over today, and I thought I'd treat them with a nice meal. Would you mind helping me a bit? Of course, I'd be happy to help you, Jumoke said. Mrs. Gladys remembered she needed more groundnut oil for the chicken she was frying and handed Jumoke some money. Could you please run across the street to grab a bottle of groundnut oil? I need a bit more to finish this chicken, Mrs. Gladys said. No problem, ma. I'll be right back. Jumoke smiled and left the house to buy the groundnut oil from the nearby shop. As she made her way back, feeling happy about the day ahead, her steps slowed when she saw Chichi standing in her path. Chichi's eyes was cold and resentment, and her presence made Jumoke's heart race. So this is where you have been hiding. I see it now. You have been hiding here, trying to play innocent while destroying my marriage. Well, that ends today. You are a thief and you won't get away with this. Chichi, I am not the same naive girl you used to know. I won't let you treat me like that anymore, Jumoke replied. Chichi laughed bitterly, stepping closer, her arms crossed in defiance. Oh, so now you have the guts to talk back after stealing my husband. You really think you are something now, huh? Chichi said, but Jumoke stood firm, matching Chichi's cold glare. I didn't steal your husband, Chichi. You pushed him away with your lies and cruelty. You lost him all on your own. Jumoke replied, I should have sent you to your grave when you were still in my house. You snatched my husband, and I am going to tell the world about it, Chichi replied. Well, now I know what I need to do. I will marry him. You know what? You know I'm carrying his child, and his mother wants me to marry her son. He's going to be a great husband and father. I will even invite you to the wedding, Jumoke said, smiling. Chichi's hand flew up in anger and slapped Jumoke across the face, but Jumoke barely reacted. Instead, breaking into a soft laugh that only seemed to make Chichi more furious. Instead of slapping me, Chichi, maybe you should pray for forgiveness and ask God to bless you with a womb, since you don't have one anymore, Jumoke said. Chichi's face shifted from anger to shock as she narrowed her eyes. So Michael has told you everything, Wow. Wow, Chichi said. Jumoke raised her chin, speaking firmly. Yes, and this is the last time, Chichi. Don't block my path again. If you do, I won't be so nice, Jumoke replied. Chichi's face twisted with rage and she took another step forward. How dare you speak to me like that? Is it because you are carrying a bastard in form of my husband's child? Chichi responded. Jumoke's anger fled and she raised her voice. Don't you dare call my child a bastard, Chichi. Chichi shoved her, sneering. Oh, and what are you going to do about it? Oh, you want to see, right? Jumoke said. In a moment of fury, Jumoke slapped Chichi hard twice. Chichi staggered back, shocked, but quickly lunged at Jumoke. The two women grappled with each other, shouting angrily. People around them began to shout and try to put them apart, asking why Chichi would fight a pregnant woman. Mrs. Gladys, hearing the voice, rushed outside. She stopped in her track, eyes widened in shock at the sights before her. Without hesitation, she stomped over, her gaze hard and commanding, and waved the crowd away. "What on earth is going on here?" Mrs. Gladys said. The crowd parted as Mrs. Gladys approached, her focus on Jumoke and Chichi. She looked at Jumoke with concern. "Jumoke, are you alright?" Jumoke nodded through her cheek, but still red from Chichi's slap. "I'm fine, ma." Mrs. Gladys placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Go inside, my dear. I will handle this." Jumoke hesitated, glancing at Chichi, but with a nod, she turned and walked inside. Mrs. Gladys faced Chichi, her expression now cold with anger. Without warning, she slapped Chichi 3 times in quick succession. Chichi staggered back, holding her cheek in shock. "Mother-in-law, what did I do to deserve this?" Chichi asked. Mrs. Gladys stared at her in disgust. "What did you do?" "I regret the day my son married you, Chichi. You are nothing but trouble. Shameless." Chichi tried to play innocent, her anger rising. "So it is because of that girl, isn't it? You are taking her side," Chichi said. Mrs. Gladys raised her hand again, her voice sharp with warning. "Don't ever mention Jumoke's name again. She's carrying my grandchild, something you will never have. And if you do anything against her, you will have to answer me. Do you understand, you barren woman?" Mrs. Gladys said. Chichi stood there speechless, her eyes filled with a mix of shame and anger. She opened her mouth as if to retort, but thought better of it. Mrs. Gladys remained firm, unwavering in her stance, and turned to go inside. Meanwhile, Chichi's ear had started to bleed from the bite Jumoke had given her. Chichi stood outside, her cheek still stinging from the slap. The shock of Mrs. Gladys defending Jumoke turned into pure anger. She clenched her fists and muttered, "I won't let them get away with this. They will all pay." Frustrated, she dialed David's number, hoping for support or a plan, but the line was switched off. Gritting her teeth, she stormed off, vowing revenge on Jumoke and Mrs. Gladys. Inside, Mrs. Gladys found Jumoke in the kitchen. Though her face was bruised, her spirits remained strong. Mrs. Gladys felt guilty as she approached her. "Jumoke, I am so sorry. If I hadn't sent you to buy oil, Chichi wouldn't have comforted you like that." Mrs. Gladys said. "No, ma. Please don't apologize. You did nothing wrong. Chichi's actions are her own fault, not yours," Jumoke said, placing a hand on Mrs. Gladys' shoulder. Mrs. Gladys' eyes softened with affection and pride as she took Jumoke's hand. "Thank you, Jumoke, but I want you to know, as long as you are here, I will protect you. You are family to me." A few hours later, the doorbell rang and Mrs. Gladys quickly opened the door. Jumoke stood behind her, curious. When the door swung open, Jumoke froze. It was her family, her father, Mr. Afolabi, her siblings, Iremide, Moju, David, and her little brother, Jumoju, all standing there, looking at her with a mix of hope and guilt. Before Jumoke could react, Jumoju rushed to her, wrapping his little arms around her and crying. Seeing her family, Jumoke's own tears began to fall as she hugged him back. Jumoke, I'm sorry for everything. I should have protected you better. I should have been there for you," Mr. Volabi said, his voice shaking. "I'm so sorry, Jumoke. I was selfish. I let my anger clouded my love for you. You didn't deserve any of this. I was jealous," Iremide said, wiping her tears. Jumoke stood in silence, overwhelmed by their apologies. She looked at their tear-streaked faces and felt both pain and forgiveness swelling in her heart. She couldn't hold back any longer and began to cry. I don't know what to say. Jumoke said. She lowered her gaze, trying to process everything. The tension in the room thickened until Moju stepped forward, her face filled with remorse. After watching your video, Jumoke, the one where you confronted those who wronged you, I realized how wrong I was. I should have been there for you, my sister. Please forgive me, Moju said. Jumoke's lips trembled as the weight of her pain came rushing out. It felt like years of suffering breaking free. Mrs. Gladys moved to her side, gently rubbing her back. Let it out, dear. You have been carrying this for too long, Mrs. Gladys said. No, I'm the one who is sorry. It is my fault. Because of me, all of you are motherless. It is my fault, Jumoke said. Iremide shook her head, crying harder. No, Jumoke, it is not your fault. I'm the one to blame. I'm sorry. I caused mother's death, Iremide said. Jumoke's eyes widened in shock. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. What are you talking about, Iremide? Jumoke, Iremide has confessed. She put something in mother's water. That is what led to her death, Mr. Afolabi said with a sign. The words hit Jumoke like a stone. She froze, struggling to breathe. Then she exploded with anger and pain. How could you, Iremide? You were our sister. How could you do this to her? She should be in jail. Jumoke's voice cracked, full of betrayal. Iremide lowered her head, her tears flowing. You should all hate me. I deserve to be in jail. Michael intervened, speaking softly and calmly. No, Iremide, you have confessed. You don't have to go to jail. We can walk through this together. But Jumoke shook her head, furious. Enough, Michael. She made me carry this guilt, thinking I was the reason our mother died. All along, it was her, our own sister. Her voice shook with anger and sorrow. Michael tried to comfort her, but she was too distraught. Without another word, Jumoke stomped into the bedroom and slammed the door shut behind her. Michael followed, knocking softly on the door. Jumoke, please open up. Please open the door. Let us talk. Inside, Jumoke sat on the bed, sobbing into her hands. She heard Michael's voice, but her heart was too heavy to respond. Back in the living room, Mrs. Gladys took a deep breath and addressed the others. All of you should sit down. Don't worry, my son will handle this. Everything will be taken care of, Mrs. Gladys said. Slowly, everyone took a seat, the tension still hanging in the air. Michael opened the door and entered the room. Jumoke stood up, shouting, Jumoke, please calm down. No, Michael, we need to call the police. Why would she do that to our mother? My mother was everything to me. She was my pride and my joy. Do you know how it felt when she died? Especially that night when she was talking to me about the pregnancy. I've been carrying the guilt, thinking I was a bad luck to the family. I don't care if she's my sister. She needs to be arrested. She needs to face the law. Michael held Jumoke's hand as she cried, trembling with anger. Jumoke, we don't need to arrest her. She confessed already. If you get her arrested, you will bring hatred back into this family. I don't care, Michael. I don't care. Jumoke, listen to me. The reason she did this is because your mother loved you more than them. She always nagged her, asking why she couldn't be more like you. Iremide was jealous of the love your mother showed you. That is why she did this. Jumoke sat down, overwhelmed by the pain. She started crying harder. Please, don't cry, Jumoke. You are making me emotional, Michael said. This isn't right. It is heartbreaking. How could she do this? How am I supposed to look at her, knowing she's behind our mother's death? Michael gently rubbed Jumoke's shoulder, his voice calm but firm. Jumoke, I know it is hard to forgive her, especially with everything you've been through, but letting go of this hatred might be the healing you need, Michael said. Jumoke took a deep breath, her eyes filled with tears. She wiped them away, her voice barely a whisper. I will try and forgive her, Michael, but trust will take time. It's not something I can give back easily. Jumoke replied. Michael nodded, understanding. Slowly, Jumoke got up from the bed and followed him into the living room. Her heart heavy but slightly lighter. In the sitting room, her family waited anxiously. Jumoke took a deep breath and steadied herself. I have decided to forgive you all. I will leave the past behind, but please understand, it is not easy, Jumoke said. Relief filled their faces as they gathered around her, hugging her warmly. Mr. Falabi, Iremide, Moju, David and Jumoke held each other tightly, sharing a moment of healing. The pain, the misunderstanding were still there, but they began to soften. After a few minutes of talking, Mrs. Gladys returned with plates of food, breaking the silence with a smile. All right, everyone, let's eat. We all need this, she said. As they sat down to eat, the sound of cutlery filled the room, but Mrs. Gladys' gaze shifted to Michael, her face filled with hesitation. Michael, I need to tell you something. Chichi came here and attacked Jumoke earlier today. Michael's face darkened with anger. She did what? How dare she? I need to arrest her right away. Can you believe she came all the way from Lagos to Ondo just to hurt Jumoke? Jumoke's eyes widened in disbelief. She couldn't understand why Chichi would go to such lengths. What was she even looking for here? Jumoke asked. David shifted uneasily in his seat, looking pale. He took a deep breath and looked at Jumoke, his voice shaking with guilt. He recounted the encounter he had with Chichi. Jumoke's mouth dropped open, shock and hurt flashing across her. Chichi made me believe. She told me you were trying to steal her husband and that you have been telling her and Uncle Michael that you hate us all and you will never forgive us. She even offered me money, David said. Jumoke sat back, stunned, unable to process the betrayal from both Chichi and her own brother. Mrs. Gladys shook her head and turned to Michael, her voice filled with concern. Michael, we need to get Chichi arrested. She's dangerous. Who knows what else she will do? Michael placed a reassuring hand on his mother's shoulder, his voice firm. Don't worry, Mama. I will handle it. Chichi won't hurt anyone again. Meanwhile, at Chichi's friend Lolade's house, Chichi was pacing angrily, fists clenched as she recounted the events. Can you believe Mrs. Gladys slapped me? All because of that worthless Jumoke? Chichi said. Lolade shook her head, her voice filled with bitterness. Chichi, you need to be serious. Jumoke is the one who ruined your marriage. Lolade, I don't even know where to begin. My mother-in-law always treated me like an outsider, but this time she went too far. It's all because of that Jumoke. She worshipped her like a saint, but she can't stand me anymore, and she only just met her. Chichi said. You know I warned you about this, Chichi. Jumoke is the cause of your problem. She twisted Michael's mind, making him think you are the enemy in your home. You need to plan how to deal with this, especially her. She's the one who ruined your marriage. Lolade said. I don't know what to do, Lolade. Michael's lawyer sent me the divorce papers. I can't believe he's actually leaving me after everything we've been through. How could he do this to me? All because I don't have a womb. Chichi, you need to be smart about this. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. If you want to survive this, take control. Show Jumoke and everyone else that you won't be walked over, Lolade said. Chichi, fueled by anger, pulled out her phone and dialed David's number. Her fingers trembled as she hit call. After a few rings, David answered. Hello, David. I've been calling you all day. Where are you? Are you on your way? I sent you the money, Chichi said. Look, I am sorry. I can't do this anymore. I've thought about it over and over. I'm sending the money back to you. I don't want any part in this. I can't hurt my sister, David said. What? Are you kidding me? How dare you change your mind like this? You need to do this, David, Chichi said. I said no. Stay away from Jumoke. If anything happens to her, you will regret it. I am not getting dragged into your mess. Leave my sister alone, David replied her. You little rat. How dare you betray me? After I gave you money, you will regret this, David, Chichi said. Send me your account details. I will send your money back or kiss it goodbye, David said. How dare you, David? Chichi replied, but David ended the call. Chichi fumed with rage, gripping her phone so tightly that her knuckles turned white. In her fury, she threw the phone to the ground, watching it shatter as she screamed, how dare he? That little rat betrayed me. Calm down, Chichi. Don't waste your energy on him. We'll handle this ourselves. You want them to pay, right? We will make sure they do, Lolade said. Leave it to me. I will help you carry out the plan. Just stay low for now. Trust me, I will handle everything, Lolade assured her. Chichi, consumed by rage and betrayal, spent the rest of the day venting her frustration to Lolade. She knew she had to take control, but the support from her friend gave her comfort. Are you sure, Lolade? Yes, I am sure. What are friends for? Later that evening, Michael returned to his house, expecting to find an empty house with Chichi gone. But when he searched the room, he found her things still scattered around. It seemed she hadn't moved out yet. He knew he needed more proof of her actions, so he secretly set up cameras around the house, hoping to catch something useful for the divorce proceeding. As he was about to leave the compound, the gateman flagged him down. Oga, good evening, Sao. Good evening. How are you? What is going on? Anything you need to tell me? Yes, sir. I won't tell you, say, Nami send you that video of Madame Jomoke where she dey eat food from the dustbin. Nami send them give you. Michael's face changed. A mist of shock and gratitude washed over him. Wait, you sent me the video? Yes, sir. Nami send them. I no fit just watch Madame Chichi dey treat that poor girl badly. She suffer well when you know they around, and nobody for our compound be they do something about her. Now why I send you the video, make you foresee with your own eyes, the gateman said. Michael felt a deep respect for the gateman's honesty. Thank you. I had no idea things had gotten so bad. It is because of you that I saw the truth about Chichi. I appreciate it. Michael handed the gateman some cash. Here, take this. You deserve it. I will send you more when I get back home permanently. The gateman accepted the money with thanks, nodding respectfully. Thank you, sir. When you go come back? You know they stay here again? The gateman asked. No, I will be back soon. I need to sort a few things first. Okay, sir. Thank you. Go well, abeg. As Michael drove off, he was filled with anger, knowing what Jomoke had been through in his absence. He was determined to make sure Chichi could no longer hurt anyone. The truth would come out and she would face the consequences. What do you think Chichi planned to do to Jomoke? Do you think she would succeed? We'll find out in the final chapter. Thank you for liking this video. Thank you for engaging in this video. I would love to know your thoughts on this story so far. Drop a comment in the comment section, and if you love this video, please share to your family and loved ones. See you in the final chapter. Bye.